get started. We are missing one panelist, but we'll go ahead and get started. So you are in the crisis not averted, $1.5 trillion in debt and rising. My name is Chantel Garvey. I'm a partner at Reach Capital. And today I am joined by Dan Rosenzweig from Chegg, Byron Ageist from Opportunity at Work, and hopefully we'll also be joined by Charlie Javis of Frank. And as we were preparing this panel, one of the things we talked about is actually
she's here.
Here she comes, yay, come on up.
How important are you to get to come late to your own panel?
Yes. And one of the things that we talked about in our prep call was that...
Can we mic her? Go get mic'd.
Go get mic'd. Back there. All three of these companies would not exist if our post-secondary system was working as it should and we weren't in this student debt crisis, so we'll kind of get into that. But before we start, I kind of want to just set the groundwork and the high-level stats on where we are today. So 44 million borrowers in America owe $1.5 trillion in student loan debt. That has more than tripled since 2004. 40% of borrowers are expected to default by 2023. The average debt at graduation is $30,000. This is up from $10,000 in the early 90s. And we're also seeing a lot of downstream impacts, right? So we're seeing a decline in home ownership, car ownership, and even a decline in entrepreneurship. So I just want to open up first and talk about how did we get there? Like, this did not happen overnight. And so I want the panelists to talk about, like, what happened? What went wrong? What are some of the underlying causes that now we have a $1.5 trillion student debt crisis?
Well, so Byron Ageist, if I had to start with that question on what happened, what went wrong, I think the best way to understand this emerging student debt crisis is that we've really made a bet in this country, as you think about our labor market and workforce system, to really put all of our chips on higher education, right, and on college. If you look at other advanced economies, they'll tend to spend between 4, 5, maybe 10 times as much per person on active labor market policies, so things like apprenticeships and other kinds of interventions that really are aimed for learning in the context of the labor market. Whereas in the U.S., we've stripped those programs down. They're about 90%. They've been reduced by about 90% since the 70s in real terms. Whereas we've effectively put all of our money on college. So we had this idea that if pretty much everyone who was willing to try could go to college, they could all get sort of good jobs, college-style jobs. But then at the same time, many of the good jobs didn't require college before, and employers have ratcheted up the need. In a sense, employers have collectively, not intentionally, weaponized higher education so that you need a college degree to get a good job. So everybody's got to try to go to college, but then colleges themselves, the highest quality colleges haven't really expanded seats. So there's been this massive explosion of college seats that are not that high quality, but are hugging a price point from these very expensive other colleges. And then to add to that, we then strap X amount of dollars onto the backs of 17-year-olds, 22-year-olds, everyone trying to do that, and just go out there without any guidance and say, let's see how it goes. So we've really got a system that has sort of forced people down this channel. I mean, there's a lot of excellent reasons to go to college, but there should be alternatives to it, and that has made it so that really they'll pay any price, and you then strap government dollars on top of that so it flows. So I think that's how we got to where we are. It was sort of well-intentioned, but it's a big problem, and a lot of people are not in a position where they can really go forward the way it is.
Charlie?
I guess I'll take it from the other side, which is more the financial perspective. So the government is not really set up to be a bank, which is what it is. It's the 11th largest bank in the US, if not even further. So you have these assets that are going through what's called the FSA that are then being lent out to millions and millions of students over the years. And that's the problem. So if you look at other economies, take France, anywhere, which is where my parents are from, basically everyone gets a higher education degree, but you don't have this issue for student debt. You have the highest, masters, all of the matriculations that's there. However, structurally, governments are not set up to lend. Different information that could support that includes one, they have zero underwriting criteria. So what kind of bank and lender has no underwriting criteria? That is probably the dumbest thing someone can do. If the government were a fund, they would have been shut down year one of operation just because, one, the administration costs of the program that they're putting behind it is insane in the billions of dollars, and then their performance is terrible. So let's say in interest they make $60 billion a year, they are losing over $400 billion a year on this program. So structurally, giving kind of a whole program with billions of dollars with zero underwriting and zero risk criteria is really a disaster, and that's why you have ballooning debt in this country. If we were actually responsible, both as a government and as a school system, we would lend to people who could afford and have good school outcomes. And until we start thinking about student lending when it comes to student outcomes, we're going to have a problem. And so that is kind of the alignment and readjustment that's needed in the market.
Anything else to add, Dan?
Damn, they're smart.
So if we just think about the system that we're operating in today, right? So you talked about potentially not everyone needing to go to college, or there are alternative pathways. Charlie talked about this information asymmetry. What are other issues around just that piece right there, the information asymmetry? If everyone knew this is what I'm going in for, this is my ROI, would that kind of help solve the problem, do you think?
I feel like you have more data than I do, but...
Yeah, but I feel like you're smarter than I am. So, look.
I'll let the data speak first, then I'll analyze it.
Which is usually how our negotiations go. So, you lean towards the employer having a level of responsibility. You lean towards the government having a level of responsibility. So I'll pick the middle ground, which is the institutions themselves. They were never designed to scale at the level they're being asked to scale. The physical infrastructure can't do it. The second thing is the way they were designed, and I'm not commenting whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm simply acknowledging the fact that they don't work for the modern day student. So they were originally designed for people to take 4 years off of their life, right? The 4-year institutions. We don't have that luxury anymore. They were designed for people who were 18 to 22. The average college student is 25 now. They were designed for people who did stupid things but weren't having to be responsible and have families. 25% of all college students already have a child. They weren't designed for the speed of the need for curriculum change that the employer base is now obligated to do in order to compete in the global economy. And then the flip side is the costs. They were never run in a way that had to be responsible to a P&L. And so over half of all college presidents tell you that they feel they're likely to go out of business. So what we have is we have businesses who have demands. We have a government who tried to do something good, which is make education in the past to middle class available to more people, diverse incomes, diverse backgrounds, immigrants, all things that you would root for the success. And then we have the overburdened institutions who don't have enough professors, don't have enough class time. But more importantly, if you just think about what the modern day student is, to the data point, they're older, they have less money. By 2022, 25% of all attendees of colleges, English will be their second language, which is already happening K through 8 now. We have a massive immigrant population, which I'm the beneficiary of, so I root for it. So we have people of different backgrounds, different cultures, different financial backgrounds, and we have lots of people entering the system who didn't have the support system that the schools were originally designed for, which is kids that could handle the work because they had been trained, supported, tutored to get into it. So what you've got is, the result is we wanted more people to go, but fewer are graduating. We wanted more minorities to go, fewer of them are graduating. What you're getting is 84% of rich people are graduating. And overall, 43% of all students that go don't get a degree, which means it over-indexes to people who had less money, borrowed money, can't pay it back. So we got a mess.
And do you feel like the goal of institutions has shifted over time? So would you say before college was more about a civic or a social role, and now it is primarily an economic role? Have you seen that shift over time, or has that always been the role? And
Yeah, I think it's one thing that's really worth saying about colleges and the higher education system in this country is it's incredibly diverse, right? And it has been. So you can't really say, colleges are for X because there are big research universities, there are liberal arts colleges, there are, sort of large-scale state colleges, there are community colleges which themselves play many different roles, from sort of affordable first 2 years to more sort of technical. And really, in many ways, the diversity of the system can be a strength, has been a strength historically.
Should be a strength.
Should be a strength. And in fact, I think one of the things that strikes me most about the debate is sometimes the existing accredited higher education system sees this sort of new emergence of different kinds of sort of learning and post-secondary learning and blended learning and everything as kind of, well, that's different than what we do. But I actually see it as a total extension of what the American system at its best has been, which is to sort of like spawn new institutions and new approaches as new needs arise. I mean, think of land-grant colleges in the Morrill Act in 1862, like guaranteeing every territory when it became a state the resources to have a university that could teach agronomy and science and teachers and doctors. And I think this has been a very innovative sector over the course of American history. And I think we're at a moment where a lot of people are fearing innovation, and we're going to need it to sort of serve this diversity of students. So I just think that is a really important thing to say, because as Dan said, the students now are way more diverse than ever, and so there are going to be different needs, and the system has to, I think it should preserve this diversity, it should have many more options, and it's got to have better information, because I'm sure I don't know as much about finance as Charlie, but I know that without good information, you can't have good underwriting or good lending or good anything.
Yeah, I think information asymmetry definitely plays a key role, especially with what we do, which is educating on the front end before you actually take out debt, before you actually think about what institutions you are going to and how affordable they are. And so I think a lot of the issues we're focusing on potentially the in-school experience, or focusing potentially some schools on let's get a degree to get this type of job, and really focusing on that training component. But there isn't a lot of information about what are the goals specifically of an institution. When I show up and I'm willing to pay $30,000 that year, what am I getting as a student, and where is that student advocate, and where is that information? And so the college scorecard was meant to be something like that. I know Dan has a lot of data as well on the school side. We have a lot of data between financial aid and the school side, but how do you make that digestible, and how do you start changing behavior? Because with all of this information, it's available. The government has it, companies have it.
so why is that data not transparent today? Like why is there not a database I can just
the
go to?
education lobby is huge. Given the outcomes that this sector currently has, we cannot actually stand by a lot of the institutions that are, advertising and enrolling most of the students today. I think the other big part of why that information isn't necessarily available is that, with the larger institutions that have the longitudinal data sets, what is going to compel them to give you that information? There's no regulatory framework, standards, or benchmarking around that. And companies work at different parts of the value chain. So you have in-school, that's like school support, or Dan's at, I'm pre and a little bit into, and then you have the employer side. So how do we mesh that all together? And what does that look like? And can you actually have open data in this space to be able to start addressing a lot of the concerns that students need to make a $500 billion purchasing decision every single year on their higher education?
So, this is going to be an interesting presidential season. Excuse my voice. Apparently I yelled at myself last night because I don't know what happened to my voice. So you're going to have the question of free college.
Yeah.
You're going to have the question of free community college. You're going to have the question of should, Jamie Dimon, don't let the government give loans because they have no criteria. then you're going to have the question of, well, is that fair? Because the only people who are going to get loans are the people who need them less. And you're going to get rid of diversity and immigrants and all of those things. So this is about missing the point here, which is the impact of this debt on this economy is massive. I read a piece yesterday that it's now, and we debate this, right? The impact on home ownership. It's 1% down because of college debt, car ownership, retail, clothing, anything you can imagine, food. So our goal is for everybody to collaborate and recognize institutions need to have a purpose. Some people will want to go in person, some people can't. So the belief that everybody would be better off if they all went to an institution, got taught by a great professor in a small classroom. As the son of a public school teacher for 39 years, I would agree that's best for most. It's just available to almost none. And so we have to balance the fact that why can't technology make it cheaper? It has for everything else we do. Why can't technology make it more relevant, which is increase the catalog of what somebody could learn? Rather than program everything for them, let them program some for themselves. Why can't we balance intellectual skills, cultural skills, historical skills, with actual job skills? Why does this have to be an either or? So if we're gonna make future less expensive and get a better ROI and have people have a better chance to pay it back, it's gonna need to do different things than it does today. If you make the system that is today free, you actually won't have solved the problem. You'll just exacerbate it because they can't scale. And so you're gonna have people who didn't take out debt but still can't take time off from their job to go to school if you make it all physical. So right now what you have is we've got everybody trying to salvage. You've got the government trying to salvage getting this interest to pay down the debt. You've got corporations trying to force people into more vocational of all kinds. And you've got institutions trying to preserve a system that can't possibly meet or scale to the needs, no matter how awesome professors are. So I think the key to solving this is going to be accessibility, on demand, more affordable, multiple languages, larger catalogs, support from humans, whether they be in person or online, is an opportunity for us to lower the cost, increase availability, and get rid of this. Now we are working on, and Charlie's actually been helping in the background, a proposal on student debt that we're going to roll out in a few months from now. But the thought that they're just going to dismiss it all isn't going to happen. So we need to figure out a way for all the relevant players to participate. And so as an example, you have this big debate going on in college sports like right now. Should the athlete be paid? Because the NCAA is funding schools, making money on its own, and funding professional sports leagues. So these athletes get to go for nothing. Well, we got to get the corporations and the companies to think of colleges as their NCAA, as these are their future employees, as these are people that they should invest in, not after they hire them, but to get them before they're hired. And so I think if we can work with the government, with getting the cost of institutions down, with technology and availability, and then with corporations, with massive amounts of cash on their balance sheets. So what you see is institutions building new businesses around that, continuing education, right? Let's get the corporation to pay Pluralsight online or Trilogy offline under the name of the school, or graduate school or business school. But we got to get right into the undergraduate level. And so I think there's a way to do this, and I think we're going to have some interesting ideas, and I think we're going to get destroyed on Twitter for putting them out. But, you know.
But I think you're right. I think the conversation has been really grounded in this free college, right? So now more than 20 states have some form of a free college program, but it's missing the point, right? And we know that free college is not the answer. It actually can exacerbate the problem, but nobody's really talking about the accessibility problem, alternate, paths to careers. Why do you think the focus of the conversation is just on free college and not and actually solve the underlying system?
Well, one of the things is, look, affordability is a problem for a lot of people.
Massive problem.
Right. So the reason free college is such a, or free community college is such a discussion is because it's plainly the case that many people who in our current system really need to go to college to be able to get onto a career path because we've narrowed the pathways. And so for them to actually get on that career path, they have to go to college. They don't have the money to do it. And so that's why free college. But I think what's underlying this is one of the most striking things about the debate to me is that people talk about the cost of college all the time, but they're not actually talking about the cost of college. They're talking about the price of college. And price and cost are different things, right? Cost is what it actually takes to deliver a service, right? Like what are all the kind of component parts? And so price is related to cost, but it's also related to subsidies and cross subsidies and, right? And sort of price discrimination. There's so many things that go into price that are not cost. But over time, if the cost keeps going up and up and up and up and up, well, eventually the price is gonna go up, right? Because it's just a question of who's paying that price. So I don't think.
Or can anybody afford to?
Well,
so even if you give something for free.
Can a system afford to?
Right, so if you give something for free, it's free to the student, but it's not free. It's not free to the taxpayer.
Right.
It's somebody's paying and everybody's paying, and if it doesn't produce a result that can ultimately sustain that payment, whatever form it comes through, it won't work.
But that's what I would underscore, is produce a result. That's the key, to me, that's the key question, and it would be the key to your underwriting question too, because in fact, you should really think about an education loan if you were thinking about it as not as a consumer loan, like buying a loan to buy a television set, but it's more like a small business loan, right? It should be sort of, like if you have an order and you need working capital to fill that order, where you're going to have more earnings at the end of it. That's why you would get a loan, and there's an issue. There's benefits to college, potentially other than economic. So it's a perfectly legitimate public policy choice to subsidize that if that's what we choose to spend our collective dollars on. However, from the standpoint of the main rationale for this, which is sort of higher earnings, that's what we're saying. That's really the reason we're putting so much money into this, is saying, so people can earn more. But that, of course, depends tremendously on A, whether they graduate, B, whether their degrees.
Why we're putting it in. 77% of all college students say the primary reason they go to college is to earn more.
Right.
It's not like it's what they want. They think it's the path to do that.
Absolutely.
And that has changed as well.
So if it isn't the path to do that, somebody should tell them.
Right. Well, and again, it depends on what your alternative is, right? So because we've now done it where, like 2/3 of new job postings for secretaries, for administrative assistants, require a bachelor's degree today, even though only 20% of current admin assistants have a bachelor's degree. We've ratcheted up in job category after job category the requirement for bachelor's degrees in order to even have access to make a living. So people are not wrong when they say, well, I think I need to go to college to get a good job, because that is mostly the case. I'm saying that the system, and I'm agreeing with Dan, that the system is not really designed to have a very high success rate for this whole set of people, and it is the success rate. It's the lack of the payoff. If, for example, and you can see this in the student loan default data, actually the highest default rates are for those that have less than $5,000 of debt, and the lowest default rates are those who have over $100,000 of debt. Why? Because those with $100,000 of debt are typically in getting them in sort of graduate programs that are going to deliver them the return, and so they
and graduated, which
and
is
graduated. Right.
That's really just a function of the credit spectrum. Like someone borrowing less than $5,000 is likely going to be subprime. Someone borrowing over $100,000 is likely to be super prime, at least from the data we see matching.
Yeah, in terms of their ability to pay, but then also, the idea of if the college was actually fulfilling its promise, you would have a higher ability to pay coming out than going in, and that's not happening because they're not graduating, they're not
But it
going
still
to
doesn't
school.
address the cost of why it should cost so much to begin with.
Oh, I agree with that.
The interesting part is in the US, the education funnel is completely inverse. Like you take European markets and don't take like the top 10% of students who might be going to private or very competitive schools. You take the public system. What happens there? So my friends in Europe, they go and then there's an exam after a year in or maybe after a semester in, and then you're able to matriculate because you have that level. And so the degree means something. Today, you go to most universities, there's over 7,000 of them here. What does that degree mean? It is almost worthless because there are so many of them. You have no idea what you're studying. Most people graduate and don't get that job. So if you actually make the degree worth something, whether it's based on merit, whether it's based on specific levels of studying, graduating means so much more. And so I think part of that, and it's funny that you say increase the course catalog, because if you want to deliver a cost of education at a cheaper level, you look at kind of the bigger university systems in the world, and they have a more constrained set of classes because you don't necessarily need to study gender anthropology. Like for most people to get a job, you can take that as an elective, but it shouldn't be part of every single.
But Charlie, that's my passion. That's what I want to study.
Online, maybe.
Well, that's the point, which is you can expand the catalog because there's newer delivery systems,
Exactly.
right? You can, you know, our view is more people need to learn more things, are going to need to learn more things over the course of their life than they had to over the course of my life. And what they have to learn is going to evolve, and the speed in which an individual institution or professor can learn it, teach it, scale it, can nowhere match what technology can do. And so we're not saying replace it, we're saying enhance it so that you can expand the catalog. Because if you go to what you're talking about, which is people go on campus, 95% of the time on campus is outside of a classroom. So also in the systems you're talking about, very few people in those countries go to the higher institutions.
Totally.
So it's designed the way the American system was already designed for the elite to go. I'm trying to make it available to a broader group of people to be able to learn what they think they need to learn, both as human beings, whatever their passion is, as well as job skills. I don't think we need to limit it. If we program, if all 7,000 institutions program, they're going to look very similar. We need students to be able to invest their own selves in it as well, and that is partially by picking curriculum they think would help them make better choices. So this is not an easy answer, and there's a lot of reasons we got here, which was your original question. The question is, how do we get out of it?
Yeah.
So we're going to need to forgive some of this debt. We're going to need to lower the interest rates. We're going to need companies to help, and we're going to need schools to not only move to online for new business models, which is what they first started with, right? Which is you're seeing graduate schools, business schools. It's okay for those kids, but not for undergrad. Now we're seeing large institutions go exclusively online for undergrad. I don't know that may be helpful to a certain subset, not other subset. So, but programming matters, and I'll give you an example. I won't say the state because I like the governor. But I met with a governor here last year who gave free community college in their state. We did an analysis that they had not done. 53% of those students took liberal arts, which my daughters took liberal arts. I took liberal arts, big fan of liberal arts, but not necessarily the degree that you need to work in that state, at least based on what employers were hiring. So we analyzed every company in that state, everybody they had hired over the last 10 years, which schools they went to, which degrees they got. And it turned out that the overwhelming majority of these community college students that got a free education in that state worked outside that state when they got the degree. So if I were the governor of that state or the taxpayers of that state, I would not want to have a curriculum where I'm paying for somebody to go be employed in another state. So there has to be a relationship, but it doesn't mean we eliminate other things that people could learn to make them better citizens, or just because they want to learn things. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying we need to expand what they can learn and not limit the curriculum to a curriculum that's not going to get them employable.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, but be thinking of your questions because I'll open up to the audience for a couple of questions. So you guys have touched on a couple solutions. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the institution? Is it the public sector? Is it the private sector? Where does the innovation really need to
blame
come
Charlie.
from? Is it Charlie? Is it the private sector? Where is this going to come from?
I think it comes through partnerships, and that might sound idealistic, but I do think there is room for government innovation, regulators to come in, private companies, whether startups or public companies, out on the market, and it's really a combination for everyone to do this together. That being said, I think, when you look at student debt and the impact on the economy, right now over 40% of our students aren't paying, period, and there is zero actual ramification because it's a government subsidized kind of field, and while it might impact the individual who's not spending elsewhere, which is a huge impact to the economy, it's not what mortgage debt was. That's very, very different. And so, as a whole, do I think, will the debt be forgiven? I think that also is part idealistic, because they could keep it on their balance sheet, and realistically, it is forgiven, because even if you garnish all of Social Security, it will not make up what student debt is owed.
But it's not forgiven because these kids can't rent.
Exactly.
Right? So they're becoming homeless, they can't eat. So there's a consequence to the actual human. So I think, if we knew the answer, somebody in this room would give it and we'd all do it. But I do believe that it's going to take a lot of will to say, what is more important to the future of this country than our kids? What is more important to the future of this country than educating young people to be great citizens, as well as great employers, as well as great employees? And so that has to be the government, the institutions, parents if they're involved, and businesses. And all of those people, there's enough collective money in this country to be able to reduce this burden, make what we teach more relevant to a larger group of people. And so I think if everybody doesn't participate, we're not going to solve it.
The other thing is you need a moment of reckoning with market pressure, because right now, and this goes back to kind of what Trump proposed on different types of caps, and while it might not be the best solution, you need market pressure on the costs. So you need loans to be capped and the price of education to be capped to actually create some version of pressure versus a continuing increasing subsidy. Because it doesn't matter what you innovate in. For example, online schools, for profit, that take Title IV funds, their cost to deliver education is very, very low. But Title IV funds, you can make $40,000 over the period of a degree, totally government subsidized. And obviously, what is the price tag of the school? To the exact number, the amount that the government will give as revenue. So I think that level of market pressure, only the government can really exert, which is unfortunate. And so I think that'll take a lot of movement and political activism for that.
But I think there's really three, when you say solving the problem, there's really three problems that are related to each other, but they're really different problems. The first is we've talked about what's gone wrong in the system, the misaligned incentives, and it's sort of fixing that so we don't keep digging a hole, right, for ourselves, and because that's where, like, this problem got worse, over the course of this panel, right? So, like, sort of stop. No, seriously. And so, like, that's one thing, is sort of stop digging the hole. The second thing is we have a generation that has been much more a much higher percentage of that generation has been harmed than any prior generation, and has a burden that I just don't think is again, it's sustainable for many, but it's not sustainable for many. And effectively, as Dan says, you have people who can't get started with their full lives and have this burden. It's actually, for most of them, it's not that high in absolute dollars, but for them, it's like it's a huge barrier.
It's indentured servitude
Yeah,
for the
it's- so
rest of their life.
it is a
if
little
they pay
few.
it off,
Absolutely.
it takes 20 some odd years to pay off something. We have people in their 50s and 60s who are still paying off college debt at a point where college was much more affordable. This is nuts.
Yeah, so I think you're going to have to write some of that off, and I think, you know, it's a challenge of if you're still digging the hole, do you write it off now while you're still, but it's going to have to be written off, and it's really going to be damaging to just let it drag on, and it's not fair, and it is. It's like practically futile. Again, because we're not talking about the whole generation, we're talking about a very significant part of the most diverse generation in American history that can be absolutely hobbled by this problem, and I do think we need to deal with that. But then the third thing is that it's not, even if we fix these two, we're not going back to a world where this is about 18 to 22-year-olds. Like, on the contrary, we're in a world where lifelong learning is going to be essential, and that's sort of the whole lifelong learning to earning. So it's a much larger percentage of people that actually need to partake in post-secondary learning, and multiple times, and not in just one blocks. And so there's a bunch of fundamental design issues for a world like that. And so, for example, just to choose one issue that relates to the financing, I would argue that we've absolutely got the risk structure of student lending backwards, right? So in other words, it's no risk to the school and it's total risk to the individual, whereas the school should know much more than the individual is likely to know about, right, what the likely outcomes are. So in fact, what you should have is more, like, think about someone who's going to be retooled in their 30s or something. I think you would want much more, what you would want to guarantee is living expenses, right, for them, and then what you would want to put at risk is more of the tuition, more of the payments to the schools, and that should be more based on outcomes. But right now, it's the opposite. The school gets their money up front, and the individual has to wait and see whether this is worth anything to them, which sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So, but I mean, and there's like, you know, half dozen other things you'd want to think about, but the point is, we have to solve the initial problem, and we should morally and economically kind of, you know, hold harmless the people who got caught in this trap. But then we really have to get on with the business of what an actual lifelong learning system is. And one of the reasons I like working with Chegg on this is because Chegg does have a view, your data, like across, and first of all, it's a student-centric view, and secondly, it's across all these institutions, because although I think, of course, I think partnerships are important, I actually think specialization is also important. The diversity of this is not just like everyone holding hands, it's like focus on things. You can expand the catalog and individual institutions can be more focused at the same time if there's more specialization and more access, right? Especially when we break down the distance barrier. So I think we have the pieces for a solution, and obviously the politics are always hard, but we got to know first what problem we're really solving.
So unfortunately, we are out of time, so I'm actually not going to be able to. We can talk about this all day.
I can't.
So I just want to end with each of you guys maybe one thing you want everyone to walk out of the room with. So if they take one thing from this panel or this session, what would that be? And I'll start with you, Charlie.
Thanks.
Put you on the spot.
It's not hopeless. We will figure it out.
This is our future. It's our collective future. It's our culture. It's our values. It's our country. It's our economic system. And it needs to be solved, and we should have the political will. And those of us in the private sector should do our part. Those of us in the governmental sector should stop avoiding this. And we should stop floating ideas that will crush it rather than help reinvent it.
It would be much easier to solve this problem if people didn't think, if you actually, your skills, however you acquired them, wherever you acquired them, were valued in the labor market and could get you a job, as opposed to you have to have a bachelor's degree or this particular sort of bachelor's degree. Because it might be the right thing for you to have that sort of bachelor's degree, but if that is imposed top down by the way employers hire, it's going to be very difficult to solve this problem because there'd be more diversity allowed and tried if that weren't the case. So every one of you works for an organization. I would like to ask you to go back and see whether you are requiring bachelor's degrees and other degrees, and if that's really necessary, what is the business purpose of that, or are you actually being part of the problem? If you're requiring a medical degree to practice medicine, I'm in favor of that. If you're requiring, if you're requiring a bachelor's degree, which as Charlie said is not even one thing, it's like, 60,000 different things, right, in order to do some office job that, believe me, there's lots of different ways you can learn how to do it, then you're actually part of the problem. And so I would urge you all to go back and try to become not part of the problem as fast as you can.
Okay, so the bottom line, be part of the solution, not part of the problem today. Let's thank our panelists. Thank you guys so much.